Okay, so now it's time to focus on your intellectual perseverance and learning about and enhancing your ability to analyze your arguments. So if you're going for that A-level response, you will want to look at what I say is the focus and maybe find a way to turn that into your introductory sentence, your topical sentence that tells me what the paragraph will be focusing on. I'm going to read through the questions, but then the most important part is going to come after that. I'm going to show you what I have in mind when it comes to answering this question like a philosopher. I'm going to tell you about the steps, the moves you need to make, and the content that I'm looking for. I'm also going to show you an example of a similar assignment that is an assignment that I've used for another class previous semesters that is very similar to this one. The method and the skills needed are the same. It's just that in that other class with the other assignment, it was about a different intellectual virtue in a different context. That said, let's go ahead and get started. To what extent would you say you reflected intellectual perseverance when learning about argument analysis and clarification? Okay, so there I'm asking you to think about when you go back to table one, look at all the assignments. Would you say that you reflected intellectual perseverance throughout all of those tasks in table one or only some of those tasks? So you could say, I reflected intellectual perseverance when learning about argument analysis and clarification throughout each and every single task in table one, through some of the tasks in table one. You could say sometimes through, or you could say something like, uh, I reflected it always while working through, assignments in table one, or you could just say always, never, often, rarely, occasionally, and whatnot. And so I'll let you decide what is true of you in making your statement. Then you can see that I say, to what extent would you say you reflected intellectual perseverance when actually applying all that you had learned to your own arguments for a grade? So that would be in the second table. So you're going back to your second table and you're thinking about subjectively, only you have this knowledge. I don't because I'm not you. I might have a sense like if you totally bombed something and made a 33 on it, then that might tell me something about your intellectual perseverance. Of course, it could be that you're in a rush, you were having a hardship, and you really couldn't show off what you knew. But that said, you have the best knowledge, so you have to decide your answer to this question. So this one, again, the second question is pointing to what is in your second table. So would you say that you applied intellectual perseverance throughout each and every task or each and every assignment, each and every attempt to clarify your argument? Would you say applied it to some attempts but not all, to none of them, rarely, occasionally? I don't recommend that you include the word extent in your answers to the first two questions because grammatically and syntax wise, it would be hard to do that. Okay, so then it says, would you say you reflect? So at this point, you have at least two sentences, at least. Would you say you reflected the same level of IP in the initial lessons on argument analysis and clarification, so that's table one, as you did in your attempts to apply what you had learned for a grade? That's table two. So maybe, for example, I'm just giving you an example. Maybe you didn't take the lessons that seriously, the ones that are in table one. So you look at those grades, and maybe your grades are kind of low. But you see that your grades are higher in your attempts in table two. So you say, when I look at my grades and I think about, where I was in terms of my mindset, my attitude, and my approach to, learning from or showing off what I was supposed to learn, I think I reflected more intellectual perseverance when I was actually working through the application of the stuff that I learned earlier. And then you'd want to elaborate. Well, why do you say that? And then you might say, well, I'm just giving you guys an example, a quick example, okay, to make this video as short as possible. So a quick example that comes up to mind is, you might say something like, well, I just wanted to get through the lessons during unit one. So, I didn't really focus or take my time with them, but, during the second one. So now, obviously what I'm saying is, it might be true of you, but you're going to have to put it in your own words. I'm just giving you ideas as to what you can say here and exactly what I'm getting at. When you scan your grades, when you scan your grades in each table. But that's not enough. You also have to think about your own mindset, your own character, your own personality, your own orientation, your own attitude about the stuff you did to get the scores that you did. How were you such that you got the scores that you did for those items? So now the last thing that I've got here is elaborate and responding to each question, incorporate the main definition phrases, and bullet points from the main lesson on intellectual perseverance. Okay, so answering all those questions that I gave you in the way suggested right now is going to get you maybe two or three extra credit points for this assignment and maybe half a point for the course, bonus point. The real work comes from making sure that you cite the official definition for intellectual perseverance, that you then pull from keywords in the definition into and integrate, embed those words into your answers to these questions above that we just went through, as well as pulling from and citing phrases and ideas from the bullet points from the main lesson on intellectual perseverance. If you are in my 8-week class, you only got an overview of intellectual perseverance and you did not get an extended lesson on intellectual perseverance. And so that is why if you were in my 8-week class, it's very important that you download the third document that you should have downloaded. So the document that you must use to get credit for this is right here. This is the document that you're going to be using. In fact, I already have it open. So if you're in one of my 16-week courses, then you've seen this and you might have saved this, but I'm going to go ahead and supply it to you in case you've misplaced it, and it just makes it easier for you if I just give you everything where you need it. If you're in my 8-week class, you have not seen this. You just got a basic definition and a basic example. Being in an 8-week class, I give you a little bit less work, but this is the lesson that you now need to use. You are strongly encouraged to carefully read this 2 or 3 times to make sure that you do not distort how it is that intellectual perseverance is being defined or has been defined in this class. It is extremely important to make sure you have a precise, clear, accurate, and thorough definition, because that, whether or not you do, is going to show up in your discussion. So there is a subjective component to this topic where it's about you, right? It's about your own subjective reality, what was true of you when it came to your attitude and mindset about, what it takes in terms of effort and concentration and focus for what you see in Table 1 and Table 2. But there's also an objective part. There's a factual part that has nothing to do with your own subjectivity, and that is there is a particular concept that you have to apply. So it's a fact. It's an objective fact that you're applying the concept of intellectual perseverance as defined in this class. It's an objective fact that this is the official definition that you should be using in your discussion for this part. So if you distort, if you misrepresent, if you don't cite the definition correctly, that's where you can lose points, because even though this is based on your subjective reality, it's also based on what we're going to consider to be an objective fact about the definition for intellectual perseverance. And you can't just say, well, I can just say whatever I want because it's about me. No, if you don't use this concept the way defined and explained in this lesson, then you can actually lose points. So the full concept is intellectual perseverance. So you can't just say, I reflected perseverance. In philosophy, especially in epistemology and something called virtue epistemology, but also in ethics, philosophers will tell you that the word perseverance by itself has a much broader general definition than intellectual perseverance. Intellectual perseverance is connected to and might fall under perseverance, but it's a much more narrow concept. So make sure that whenever you're talking about, whenever you're discussing intellectual perseverance, that you use the 2-word name for the concept. The 2-word name is intellectual perseverance and not just perseverance. There's all kinds of perseverance. We're not talking about all kinds of perseverance. We're talking only about one kind. Therefore, you should always have intellectual perseverance, those 2 words together. So you're going to, for that A-level response, so if I'm having you talk about, the extent to which you reflected intellectual perseverance throughout the stuff that you did, that you recorded basic data for in Tables 1 and 2, we have to define our terms. That's a really important skill that you can use and develop in your personal life, in your working life, and in your academic life, is define really important terms. Since intellectual perseverance is the fundamental and powerful concept that is being applied, you have to define the term. And in this class, because it's a philosophy class, I like you to define your terms because you're being exact, detailed, you're being really clear. It doesn't matter that I already know the definition. I want to see that you can use a definition, that you define your terms, and then you use the definition in an exact, thorough, and proper way to discuss something. So you'll need a sentence. I recommend that what you're going to do is in your first sentence for this topic, before you answer any of those questions that we went over, is you need an introductory clause that tells me you're going to introduce the definition for intellectual perseverance. So you need some kind of phrase, comma, quotation marks, and then cite all of the words, including the ones in blue, and put them in quotation marks. If you do not put it in quotation marks, you will lose points because you basically will be committing a kind of academic dishonesty, intended or not, a kind of plagiarism, intended or not. So make sure you cite all of these words. You cannot just plop this. You can't just start intellectual perseverance : That's not a sentence. That's just a definition. So you have to have an introductory phrase telling me that you're going to define these two words, this concept named by these two words, and use proper punctuation to show me that you're citing something. Okay, so I'm going to create a separate video for the rest of this.